Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Courage Conversation Show. I'm your host, Ashley Easter. I'm the founder and executive director of Courage 365, and we have a great show planned for you tonight. We're going to be talking about comedy, humor, and healing, and how all those things fit together. We actually have a comedian on the show tonight. Her name is Kristina Hart, and I found her on Twitter a couple weeks ago, and I've just been dying laughing ever since. There's so many wonderful tweets that she puts out, and they're not just funny tweets, but they also get really deep into different subjects that we talk about a lot here on the show. And I asked her to come on because I know, because I've experienced this and you've probably experienced this as well, that there's a connection between humor and healing. And so that is what we're going to be discussing tonight with a professional comedian. So get ready to learn some great things. And before I bring Kristina onto the show, I'm going to go ahead and read her bio. So Kristina is a faith-informed writer, speaker, comic, host, and popular online persona, the spirited voice behind the DTR blog, and now the That's Super Weird podcast. Go check that out for sure. We'll talk about links and all those things at the end, so you can definitely check that out. This Iranian American woman is unafraid to break barriers and raise tough questions related to topics like trauma, emotional suffering, and the world's longest season of singleness. Holding a degree in global studies, a certification in biblical studies, and pursuing a master's in social work, Kristina has an internationally and spiritually informed perspective that is fully attuned to the inner thoughts and struggles of her fellow millennials. Serving as a rehab admissions counselor, Kristina longs to see others flourish in true mental, emotional, and spiritual freedom. So this is going to be a really amazing show. Go ahead and hit share on this if you're watching it live or if you're catching the replay, because I know there's other people on your feed that are going to want to see this too. Now I'm going to bring Kristina on the camera in just a minute, but we're going to pause for these messages.
Talk about it. I was told not to talk about it.
So I'm here to talk about it.
Because I can't stay quiet.
I was able to break my silence.
Because of those who refuse to stay quiet.
I am a businesswoman.
Activist.
Survivor.
Survivor. Survivor.
Anxiousness can strike at any time, while driving a car, in the middle of the night, when giving a work presentation, or in a crowded place. Introducing CalmiGo, a smart calming device that learns your personal breathing patterns and adapts to you for immediate relief in just 3 minutes. It quiets your senses through breathing regulation, multisensory stimulation, and calming scents. Don't stress another moment. Click the Learn More button and start using CalmiGo today.
Hey, Kristina, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm so honored to be here.
Well, I think it was probably just about 3 or 4 weeks ago I started seeing your Twitter account, and you sort of had a tweet that got a lot of attention. And when I started following you, I was just like, oh my gosh, this girl knows what's up, and we had to have her on the show. So thank you for making the time to come.
Thank you. I know I make a joke, like the tweets that go viral are like the most stressful ones.
Yes, absolutely. I've had a couple tweets pick up speed, but only one that was like truly viral. And it was just like so overwhelming, all the comments that come in. And it's, I don't know about for you, but for me, it wasn't a planned tweet. I think my tweet, I was like in the bathtub, I just had a glass of wine and I was like, oh, I'll just tweet this out. And then I wake up in the morning, I'm like, oh my God, everybody, all the news outlets have this,
Exactly how it is.
Yes. Oh, well, you mentioned in your social media bios that you are both a comedian and a rehab counselor. And I wanted to kind of learn about the overlap between those two vocations and maybe what skills you find that are common for both that maybe people didn't recognize. Because I love the comedy aspect, and I want to talk about that specifically later on in the interview, but just like seeing the social work and comedy come together, want to learn all about those overlaps.
Yeah, I mean, as true, I think careers and passion pan out. It was not planned. About 6 or 7 years ago, I went through like a deep depression after my mom passed away. And in doing so, I had to get, psychological help, mental health help. And so I had a therapist, and this was my first time kind of entering that world in a psychological sense and not in a church sense.
Right.
And so I became really interested because I learned so much. And then I decided I wanted to completely switch industries and pursue a career in that field. So I, at that time, was also writing online blog, and I happened to be funny in the way I talked about my grief or my hurt
Yeah.
or my pain or religious trauma or whatever that looked like. And so I went into my interview to work at a women's center that were women who were they were high risk from the mental hospital with dual diagnosis. And so in the interview, they're like, "What's your experience?" And I was like, "Well, I'm a comedian and I have experienced depression." And literally they hired me on the spot, which was so funny because I just had no experience in the field other than like being passionate about it and volunteering at different things. So at the Women's Center, I led a comedy and improv class. And so I got to see these women express their pain in a completely different way and how healing that was for them, and see them smile when they told me that they hadn't smiled in years, or that they hadn't felt the pure joy of like a real laughter in so long. And that really gave me purpose. And so that is my fuel. And then it's now expanded where I love to just do stand up and do comedy on all kinds of topics, but always advocating for someone or something.
Right. I think that's so powerful, and I love the connections there. Um, and I think a lot of people think that comedy is easy, but it's not easy. There's structure to it. There's a science and an art behind what is funny, how to make people laugh. But there's also that piece, like you said, of advocating for other people, where I think, I've heard this term, like in comedy, you should always punch up, not punch down, like to
Yes.
power. So making jokes of maybe those in privilege and in power, with the joke being something that is actually elevating to those who are suffering or who are in pain. And I guess just out of curiosity, is that sort of what you're talking about when you're using comedy to advocate for other people, or is that a completely different subject?
No, it's all related. I think at the core, comedy comes from pain and tragedy, but comedy also comes from truth. However, there are ways to use like words that can be hurtful or that can be lifting up, and words are
Mm,
really powerful. So anyone can be a comedian because anyone can make fun of someone, but
right,
that's not a comedian like in the true art form, because in the
yeah,
true art form you're trying to speak to the power to point out a leverage that perhaps can't be done any other way in a
right,
conversation that releases the tension to allow the audience to know everyone's thinking the same thing, and that unifies, and that makes people who have nothing in common or think they don't know that they have something in common, because truly we're all thinking this, it's just someone has to say it.
right, right. No, that makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. And one thing I wanted to ask you about is what attracted you to comedy. But before I do that, I want to read a tweet that you put out, and this is the one that I noticed that sort of went viral. Um,
I
and
know,
for
John.
you know which one it is. You know which one it is. um, and just kind of for backstory for you and for other people. On the show, we've actually talked about comedian John Crist on two separate episodes. One was, I want to say it was in season 1, and then in the past couple weeks, just we've talked about powerful people being re-platformed after scandal, those types of things. So the tweet that you put out, I thought it was brilliant. Said, how did I get into comedy, you ask? Years ago, I dated John Christ, and after we broke up, I considered getting a revenge body, but decided on something better. I got a revenge career, and I became a comedian, which I was just like, yes. Revenge bodies are great, but like a money-making career, absolutely. So like, other than spite, what drew you to comedy?
Yeah. I think that was, I dated him 7 years ago, and it
Yeah.
was such a different time then. I was grieving my mother's passing. I was in a different industry completely, like nothing related to comedy. And he was not anyone famous at the time, right? Like but I saw firsthand what fame and the church platforming, elevating, feeding, the just the platform over the person's humanity. And I saw the devastating effects of that on people, on all kinds of situations,
Yeah.
including myself. But I never felt comfortable to say it out loud. I've talked about it before in different ways, or I had a blog that's since retired, the DTR blog, and I wrote about my experiences in all avenues, and I alluded to things, but I never outright said John's name.
Right.
Um, and so finally, I decided that I wanted to take ownership of my narrative and of what I wanted to say as a comedian. And for 7 years, I felt imposter syndrome because I thought this is his thing. Christian comedy is his thing. And now I know the last thing I want to be is a Christian comedian. Let me tell you, like, there's nothing like positive about something attributing me to Christian comedy. However, I like to say it's like, helping for people to see the pain that they perhaps experience and the hope that there can be in the nuance of all of this, including church. But for me, it started observing the unhealthy and emotional trauma within dating and church. And
Yeah.
the only way I knew how to express things was comedically because it was too painful. And I never expected that to become popular. And that is what became like gained traction. And so then finally, a few weeks ago, I work at a rehab. I advocate for recovery. I believe in everyone's recovery. I still believe in his recovery, but I also believe women. And I wanted to make that clear, but I also wanted to be able to use comedy to say what I wanted to say and
Yeah.
tell my story. And the best way to, speak truth to power, which he has a lot more followers than me. He has a lot more high-powered people around him than I do, was to make a joke. And I did.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was really skillful, and it seemed very true to yourself and true to your values. And yeah, I do think that he's somebody who has a lot of power. We've talked about on the show before, just even comedy in general, anybody being on stage, like there is a psychology behind that. Like when you get people to laugh in a group, it's connecting people similarly to if you play the right chords and you have the right smoke and lights at church, it puts people through an emotional experience, like a bonding experience. And so there is a lot of power that comes with that, and it can be used for good or not. But I love how kind of you spoke truth to power. You did it in a way that allowed you to write your own narrative of the truth. And yeah, I think obviously by it going viral, it resonated with a lot of people, and a lot of people were just like, yes, I totally get this. This is how I've experienced things in similar situations, those types of things. And so I think even that in and of itself, like when we look at like the Me Too movement, we see a lot of people talking very directly and precisely, and that can be powerful. But not everybody feels comfortable in those types of ways. And so comedy is a way that people can also speak truth to power, art, and there's just so many different ways. And I love how you ventured yourself and, just bringing things forward in a way that felt best for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I really do. And I think a comedian, from one comedian to the next, can appreciate a good joke.
Sure.
And it's like everyone has tried to tell their stories about whatever trauma that they experience.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, you know what? I can go toe to toe with a comedian, and that's what I'll do. And that is kind of my mentality now, is like, you can go up against anybody, and if you can articulate a joke that speaks truth, that even they can appreciate as a good joke,
Right.
like there's power in that. And there was a quote that he had said. I didn't fully read all the articles and stuff, but
Sure.
How do you miss it? It's all over the feeds all the time, which is also part of the problem. But it was something like he said, like, comedians are the first people that the Me Too movement went after because comedians tell the truth. And I was laughing at that because I was like, your first mistake is thinking that women are not comedians.
Yes.
That statement in itself is exactly showing what is part of the issue. Is you think that it's just men who are up there on that stage telling jokes. So now I'm going to tell jokes.
Yes.
And just advocate for healing for people.
Right. Absolutely. No, that was very skillful. And I am not a comedian, but I definitely appreciate good comedy. And I can tell that was a good joke, not just from a funny sense, but just like the depth and gravity. That did not go over my head. I was like, yes. Okay. So something else that I want to talk about in relation to your comedy is, I love how you use comedy to validate yourself, but also to validate other people. And I know a lot of your material comes from experiences that you've had either in dating or in the church community, which seemed like that overlapped, and there was some church dating that happened too. And I wonder if you could just talk about that, like talk about validation for yourself and others, and then maybe some of the ways that you do that pulling from particularly toxic types of church culture.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I work a lot with my therapist in self-validation because I find it to be the most difficult thing. And she is consistently telling me, and I have been told like my whole life, how hard I am on myself, right? But comedy allows me to be able to self-validate that we all deserve to laugh, and we all deserve joy, and we all deserve to experience these purity of emotions. And in church, I saw that people were laughing at the wrong things. And the power dynamics didn't allow for women specifically or trauma survivors to be believed or to be heard or to be seen. And I so understand what that feeling was like and is like. And my biggest trigger is feeling small. And so I have learned that with comedy, it doesn't matter how small you feel, like your words will hit and they matter and they'll make a difference in a good way, in the way that it should.
And you can see that real-time reaction when somebody laughs.
And the thing is I've learned over the course of the years, I know exactly what words to use. I know exactly who's going to come at me. I know exactly who, you get all the sides, but it's good because people should feel uncomfortable. And there are a lot of people who are on other sides of political issues than me, other sides of just religious issues, and they respect and appreciate the perspective and the way that I do it in a comedic way, because at least I'm just trying to say something in a way that is heard and brings laughter, even if you don't agree. With church, I think around the election, and I just felt like it felt like we were sitting there and like people were feeding us this info, and like we weren't allowed to say like or question whether or not we agreed or supported what they were telling us. So at some point I remember I just made like a joke, and then that escalated into multiple jokes, into the insanity of that, and how like that is cult behavior, and that is insanity. And then that opened the door to be able, people were like, oh, this is what I actually think, this is what I actually think. I'm like, good, say what you really think, like that's okay, you should be able to do that. And unfortunately that the church dynamics, it has, I have definite issues with the institution that I was in. And however, I still meet so many people who identify as Christians or even don't, but that believe they're just not in the institution, and they're okay with that, and I'm okay with that. And I don't know, I just think that whole process, the only way for me to be able to go through that was to comedically write about it each day, because each day felt crazy.
That makes a lot of sense. And I also think that, as you kind of described with that, when you're saying, when you're telling these jokes, there was kind of other people that are like, finally, somebody who gets it. And it's like a very unifying and connective thing. And I know for myself that I found that as a cult survivor, there's a lot of things in pop culture that I just don't get. I missed. I remember somebody tweeted a reply to me on Twitter, and I literally did not understand what they were saying. And I was like, is that like from the book of Exodus or something? And they're like, no, it's Lord of the Rings. And I was like, oh, I never saw that. And so, but I found that instead of like feeling shame about things I don't know, if I can make a joke about that, then it makes me relatable to other people, because even if it's not that, there's something else that they are like, I felt really stupid in this moment. Isn't it funny? And we can connect over that. And so I think that really can be healing, whether you're talking about politics, whether you're talking about traumas that you've experienced. And so I was wondering, like, if there was, I'm not asking you to like on the spot, tell me a joke, knock, knock, who's there? I'm not talking about that, but like, what is one of the funniest things? Like, what's something that you like to make fun of the most or make jokes about the most? Is there like a topic or something like that you're like, this one, it's just always calling for a joke?
Yeah. I mean, John Crisp was a pretty solid, that was a really solid, satisfying one, not gonna lie. I think Dave Ramsey, I think, the particular people in Christian culture who are like these power players that people idolize, that, I don't think anyone's all good or all bad.
Sure.
But my favorite thing to do is to make fun of the things that they say that people elevate as these like incredible like truths, and I'm like, that's actually a really weird thing that they are saying. But at the end of the day, I think for me it's important to always go through, to look at things through a compassionate lens. So like, the reason I am making the jokes about Dave Ramsey is because it also feels like it's the only way that you can talk about him without getting sued. But but also, I have compassion for people who have experienced shame, financial shame,
Yeah.
because it didn't, they lived in a culture that they were told certain things, or I
Hmm.
just have compassion for people's pain and suffering. And so the
Right.
reason that I will say something very direct with a very specific, pointed truth, but with the comedy around it,
Hmm.
is because I have compassion on a community that is
Right.
experiencing pain. And that is my goal, so that they feel heard and seen and valued.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, well, we're going to take a quick break and have some messages from our sponsors, and we will be right back with Kristina.
Anxiousness can strike at any time, while driving a car, in the middle of the night, when giving a work presentation, or in a crowded place. Introducing Calmigo, a smart calming device that learns your personal breathing patterns and adapts to you for immediate relief in just 3 minutes. It quiets your senses through breathing regulation, multisensory stimulation, and calming scents. Don't stress another moment. Click the Learn More button and start using Calmigo today.
Hey, we are back talking with Kristina Hart. We're talking all about comedy and healing, and I've enjoyed this episode so far. And everybody who's watching, if you're enjoying this, please go ahead and hit share, because you know that there's some people on your feed that need this. So go ahead and do that for us, please. Kristina, I do want to ask you another question, and that is, I know other comedians and writers, they've often talked about how vulnerable performing comedy can be, and um, as somebody who does not identify as a comedian, but who has made a few jokes from time to time, I know that it's vulnerable to do that, because you don't know, is everybody gonna laugh? Are they gonna like straight face it and you're gonna feel stupid? And so I'm wondering, is this your experience? Does it feel vulnerable to you as well? And if so, how do you push through fear and self doubt?
It definitely absolutely feels vulnerable. I started off as a writer, and at my core I'm a writer. It's like my first love. Um I love the power of words. So I always, I started off writing the blog, and then from the blog I wrote jokes every day and I posted them online. And my plan was never to stand on a stage and tell jokes. I had, like I said before, first of all, an imposter syndrome with that.
Yeah.
However, I really knew that I wanted to do it. Like, I really wanted to do it. It was this like battling of these feelings of fear and like desire. So the first time I did it, I it was so funny because I had never stood on a stage at all and ever performed for an audience. And my friend was with me, Brittany, and it was so funny because we were setting up the stage and there were no lights. And I was like, oh, we'll just put one here and there. And she's like, no, Kristina, you need a lot of lights. Like, all the lights are supposed to be on you. And I was like, oh. And so then they were fixing the lights and she's like yelling, more lights. So then I'm like, I can't see. And she's like, that's how it's supposed to be.
Right.
And I was like, oh. So I really had no concept of doing this. But the first time I did a 25-minute set, and it was
Wow.
so natural for me. I had so much fun, and that was a great audience. But I actually enjoyed the improv of kind of playing around with the audience, like the
Yeah.
crowd behind it. But I had never taken a comedy class. I'd never done any of that. I just had been writing for so long. And then I actually did one Steve Martin masterclass, which, if anyone is interested in pursuing comedy, that is the one thing that I will recommend, because that is the only thing I did. And then after that, I just would watch comedy, people that I liked. And the fear is still there. I performed before COVID, and then COVID happened and I stopped. And then I did one backyard show, but I truly haven't put myself back on the stage yet. But I made the decision that I am now ready to do it. And so I'm now going back, but it's the same thing. It's like the fear
Uh,
and but the deep desire, like, all I want is to stand on that stage and
mm.
tell stories and, have an audience just feel seen. That's all. Yeah.
And I know what it's like to be on a stage. I've done different speaking engagements, and sometimes that fear is actually kind of a good thing. And I think, I don't know, have you ever studied like the science of the flow state at all?
Yes.
It's so
Yeah.
interesting because it's like it's the combination of competence and also like stretching and some sort of high risk. And like you can, it's like athletes talk about, they're in the zone or, those types of things. And like, if there's not any fear or risk, it's harder, I think, to kind of get into that flow because it's almost just like sort of boring and doesn't keep your attention as much. But if you're really good at it, which I know you practice your craft and all of that, like getting on with a little bit of fear and you just kind of get into that flow, it's just, I don't know, it's like you lose track of time and you just can really
Yeah.
connect, and it's amazing to, it's like very exhilarating.
It is. And I think after the first time I did it, I was like, oh, I really like this. Which I was like, oh no.
Here we go, new career. Oh gosh. So on social media, we've been stalking your social media because it's just so funny. It's so funny. Like, I can't not look at all your things. You said on social media, I'll just be here telling jokes so as not to cry. And that's what we as women have had to do for checks notes ever. Can you talk to us a little bit about using humor to cope and heal? And I know we've mentioned this a little bit previously in the interview, but just maybe talk about what you meant in that. I think that I have a good understanding of, women have had to use humor just to kind of not cry and all those things, but I sense that there's something deep behind that joke. And so talk to us about that.
Yeah. Well, I think about women's rights and women's suffrage. And I think about TV shows like I Love Lucy, or people like Betty White. And there's a reason that they're so beloved. And or Dolly Parton.
Yeah.
And they all, if like you look back at the things that they say very direct things that oppose the general consensus of the male dominance, or however you want to say it, of that time.
Right.
But they do it in a very likable way. And so no one remembers them as like these people who were harsh or, but they, like Dolly Parton last year, I remember with the vaccine, she said, don't be a chicken and get the vaccine, and not one person will ever say anything bad about Dolly Parton.
Right.
And, but in regards to laughing so you don't cry, it's like, I remember the first time I went into church after my mom died, and it like took all my strength and energy to like walk back in there because I had struggled a lot with panic attacks and depression, and I like could not get myself to go anywhere in public without having like this overwhelming anxiety. So I walk into this new church because I had moved in with my dad, and there's this woman at the greeter, and she's like, hi, are you new? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, what's your name? I'm like, Kristina. She's like, oh, okay. And she looks down at my hand. She's like, oh, are you married? And I'm like, no. And she's like, oh, that's okay, sweetie. And I remember like in my head, I was like, I'm going to kill this woman. Like, I was like, oh my God. And I kid you not, like I walked in and I swear to God, I heard God laugh. Like I just felt like it was so stupid that it was like his funny because it was like absurd,
It was like if you attract mud on the carpet. She's like, oh, it's okay. We'll take care of that.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, okay, everything is funny because everything can be absurd. And that's, I guess, at the kind of the core of the laughing instead of crying.
Right. Yes. And I think laughing doesn't invalidate the seriousness or how it hit, But like you said, it brings up the absurdity and it shows it in a way that people are like, oh my God, that was so weird. Why would somebody say that? And it's kind of a lighter way than just being like, everybody is always like trying to get the singles married and it's so patriarchal. Like, I'm not saying that's not a valid way to communicate and that we don't need that sometimes, but like laughing at it brings up the absurdity while putting people's defenses down and causing them to think in a way that, they don't have their walls up. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And it's like we've all cried many
Yeah.
tears. So we can allow ourselves that. And I think of the election. There's so many absurd things, right? And being able to laugh is, I truly think, what will heal us. Because we can't cry forever. I mean, you can, and that's fine.
Right.
But I needed the relief of the exhale, and that was the way for me to have it and to share it. So whenever people are ready, they can also experience that at their own pace.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really, really good. So got two last questions for you. One is something that we ask everybody that comes on the show, and that is just, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received? Just something that like stuck with you and it just feels like your go-to piece of advice.
That's a good one, man. I think someone told me, like, whenever I'm really hard on myself, I just tell myself I did the best I could with what I knew, and I did the best I could, and that is good enough. And every day if I'm honest, I had a really hard day yesterday. I was really struggling. And so I went and I worked out, and then I was really proud of myself that I worked out because it was the last thing I wanted to do, but it did help me like regulate. And then I was like, I did the best I could, and that's good enough. And that helps me every day.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Yeah. And that's all we can do is the best that we know to do. And when we get new information or new tools, then we have those available. But before we have those, we can only work with what we've got. And that is enough. That is enough. Where can people find your work? So I know that they're going to want to follow you on Twitter. So talk to us about that. If people are watching the show and they're like, I would like some subversive comedy, how do they book you? All of those things.
So on Twitter, I am Edgy Kristina. And the reason that I go by Edgy is it was a joke based on, I just said that this was a few years ago. Like I said something about, believe that women can be pastors. And some guy was like, wow, you are so edgy. And I was like, oh my God, I was like, if that is edgy, I mean, okay. So then I just used it and it stuck. It's weird too, because people will be like, Edgy Kristina. And I'm like, that's odd, but okay.
they call you that in person?
I know. Yeah, they do. Edgy Kristina Hart. And I'm like, oh gosh. So it's Edgy Kristina on Twitter, Edgy Kristina Hart, Hart on Instagram. It's also that on TikTok. I have a podcast called That's Super Weird. It's on every platform. So we're relaunching a new season. And the website, superweirdpod.com, you can do the bookings request. But I'm in a place now where I'm revamping, so it's easier for all the bookings and all of that. But Instagram is like kind of my household place. And then there you'll be able to find everything else.
Okay, awesome. Well, we'll definitely have the links to that below these videos or in the show notes, however people are tuning in. And Kristina, this was great. I really love kind of learning some of the anatomy of comedy and how you have gone through some really tough things in your life, from the passing of your mom to relationships that were not great, and to just kind of the church culture so many of us live through, and how you are using comedy to heal yourself and validate other people. That's just such a beautiful thing. So beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And can't wait to support and promote and have you definitely on my podcast.
Oh, I would love that. I would love that. You'll have to ask me about some of my cult childhood stories.
Yes.
There's a couple
Oh,
doozies.
oh my goodness. The cults are trending right now.
Oh gosh. Well, thank you so much. And hey, everybody, also go ahead and check out our social media. If you're not following us in these places, we've got Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. You can find us in all those places. We, of course, stream this show every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. But you can catch the back episodes of the Courage Conversation Show on our website, courage365.org. And just for hopping on over there and being our guest, you can download this free ebook called 5 Keys to Living with Courage, Living a Life of Courage, and it will help you take the next most courageous steps in your healing journey. It is completely free, our gift to you. And there's a lot of other stuff on our page that is free for survivors and advocates. We've got a need help page if you're in some sort of a crisis situation and you're in imminent danger, of course, call the police. But if you need support outside of that, we've got a whole list of hotlines, other supportive blogs and websites for the different types of healing and support that you may need. And something else that we're doing that I'm really proud of, if you haven't signed up for this, I'm going to encourage you to do so. We actually have our own text message list. And when you go and sign up for our text message list, you get a text message every morning that is an empowering message written by survivors for survivors. We do not spam you with stuff. You're not getting 100 emails or messages from other survivors. You simply get a message from us. And we've had really great feedback. People going through depression and saying that this really was that joy in my day, or people who need a reminder that they really are not alone, because I think sometimes we feel that way. And so I want to encourage you, if you want to sign up for text messages, to just pull your phone out right now. I'm going to tell you exactly how to do this. It's super easy. So open it up to a clean text message, just like that. And in the to bar, I want you to type this number. Got it out? Ready? Okay. 917-809-7311. That's 917-809-7311. And then in the message box there, you're just going to type the word courage. And as soon as you do that, if you hit submit, you'll be automatically added to our text list, and you'll start receiving those Monday through Friday. I do respond to those a lot of times, so you can reply back if you want to. It's just a really good way to connect. And yeah, I want to thank everybody for showing up tonight. We've had so much fun with Kristina, and I hope that you'll give this a share with anybody else you think could benefit from it. And thank you all. I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Live with courage.